Welcome to the Sunrise Project podcast. If you're new to us here, Grants Pass Remembrance is a truth and reconciliation project on our histories, as our community's history as a Sundown Town. Now, we were a Sundown Town, but our story doesn't end there. Reconciliation is all about how we can move forward together. There's a quote that we actually talk about quite a bit in our group. It's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this podcast is really an opportunity for us to practice being together. Just one of the many ways that we can practice being in process together, practice learning from each other, and figuring out what it can look like as we move forward together. We'll hear stories. We get to kind of share our whys that bring us to this table together. We have conversations on race and racism, or as I've been working on saying, racial hierarchy. And most often we find ourselves having conversations about how we can have conversations on race and racism. Our diversities and differences bring such a richness and depth to our lives. But it's also true that they bring division, but they don't have to bring division. We can be our unique selves and be together. And getting to be here today is one way where we get to dive in and explore that. And I'm so excited to get to be together with you today, Jen. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and where we can find you out and about in our community.
I am a licensed therapist, master's level therapist, marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice in Grants Pass. And my focus is trauma and somatic, which is body-based, mindfulness-based therapy. So incorporating thoughts, body sensations, and emotions in my therapeutic process with people to help people resolve trauma and, live happier lives and feel more whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you do that practice here in Grants Pass?
Yep. I have a practice in Grants Pass. I have a private practice on 7th Street. And I see mostly clients that have the Oregon Health Plan. So All Care and Jackson Care. I want to serve populations that don't always have access to this type of therapy.
Yeah, It's important.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
You've been in town for a bit of time now. How long has it been?
Yeah, I moved here from Santa Cruz area in 2016. I've been a therapist since 2012, and I worked at Options for a number of years, and then I started private practice, I think 3 years ago now.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
We got connected. Let's see. It was at the Martin Luther King Jr. gathering.
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw you speak.
Yeah. I was so glad to get connected. I know that you do a bit of singing. Yes.
Yep. I'm in the Grants Pass Three Rivers Chorale. I love singing.
So fun.
Yeah.
So tell us, why does race matter to you?
Why does race matter to me? It's a complicated question. And I think part of it is that for some people, that question is like why race matters to them is because they don't have a choice, meaning their existence means that race and being racialized is part of their everyday life. And in a system where there's like white dominance or racism, that means not being seen fully for who they are as people. So for me, race matters because I feel like being a white person in the United States, in Grants Pass, I feel like I have a responsibility to not cause further harm to people and understand and know how I'm a part of that, and if I'm a part of that and in what ways, and try to undo. I mean, you can't undo harm, but you can stop doing harm and move forward in a way that's not harmful, you know? So I think race also matters because race is also part of people's identity, and culture and race are kind of, you know, go together in some ways. I think race in general is socialized. It's a social construct, you know what I mean? And it's a social construct with like real life, you know, impacts on people's lives. And I think it's important to talk about and understand, especially as a white person.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Now, why does Grants Pass Remembrance, or the work of Grants Pass Remembrance, matter to you? Why did that stand out?
Yeah, so I went to that gathering, and I heard you speak, and I felt excited to know that there were people doing, you know, work around, you know, dismantling racism or discussing the history of Grants Pass and like working on building relationships and education. And something that you said that understanding history, you know, it's very important to understand what's happened, to know, you know, how that's impacting us now and how to move forward from that. And as a trauma therapist too, that also rings really true to me, because when I'm working with people around trauma, pretending the trauma didn't happen or pushing it away usually is not what helps it resolve or heal. Usually having to tap into the grief of that, or you know, understanding the pain of that and empathizing and having compassion for that suffering needs to happen first before you can move forward. And I think that's true about lots of forms of harms, you know, violence or suffering, that pretending, you know, moving on by ignoring or avoiding usually is not the best tactic.
Yeah.
And like understanding needs to happen first.
It's funny how, so maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but how easy it can be to want to just move forward. I just had an interaction with my daughter yesterday, and she had experienced some kind of harm in a family setting. She had that foundation of safe. It wasn't traumatizing, I don't think, on that level. I don't think she was sharing. When she was sharing, I didn't get that, but it was something that mattered to her. And there was a piece of me that really did kind of want to just move forward. Like I don't want to have to like hash out what's going on. Like that was an uncomfortable moment for me, and realizing I've got to slow down and be with her in this moment and experience this and really understand what she's saying before we can, like, sometimes I can be so ready to just move forward and not take that time. I'm just fascinated at how on so many levels of our lives, it can be hard to stop and slow down and be in that space. Yeah. One of the reasons why I was so excited about having you in this space and getting to have this kind of a conversation is because when we were talking, we'd had a conversation a bit after we'd first connected, and you were talking at length about kind of the lens of viewing racism through that trauma lens. And that wasn't something, like the way that you talked about it connected so many pieces for me, but it's also not the way that I tend to view it, because I don't have that background in working with trauma. And I'm wondering first if maybe we could do some little bits of kind of defining of trauma, or and I love that I'm pretty aware of how objective that can be, but if we could maybe start there and dig into
trauma. So I'm just gonna say, this is like my practice, and you know, I'm not like a researcher, and I'm just gonna speak from my understanding. You know what I mean? There are experts on trauma theory that write books and do research that, you know, you can go to. My understanding of trauma is when we have an experience that is violent, or where our lives feel in danger, or our survival, or when we witness people we love, or even people we identify with, struggling under violence or oppression or abuse, we have that experience, and sometimes we can move through that experience and come out of it with meaning and purpose. It doesn't mean just because we have these experiences that we're traumatized.
Yeah.
But sometimes we end up with trauma when those experiences don't resolve and they kind of stay in our bodies. And that can happen with, that happens for different reasons, right? Like racial trauma, or traumas in families, or cultural trauma, like if there's war, or, other, state oppression, things like that, can lead to repeated traumas over and over, which makes it harder for those traumas to resolve. So it's like complicated, because do we understand why trauma does or doesn't resolve? It's kind of like theory.
Yeah.
And some theories say if you have enough like of a support system, or as a child and adult, or a safe place to be, that you can work through traumas more easily, or if you're able to, like with a therapist, help you slow it down and understand that you're safe now, that it's no longer happening to you. But with traumas that are systemic, that's challenging, because maybe in my office you feel safe enough, or with a person that you trust, you feel safe enough, but then you go out into the world and the traumas repeat. So it's like become normalized. Like some of the behavior that can happen in like domestic violence relationships too, or families where there's abuse happening, where the traumatic situations become normalized and are like integrated into the person, or the culture, or the family line. So it's like a complex topic.
Yes, totally. Which I think is that's important to acknowledge. I'm interested in, sometimes the word systemic can be confusing, or it's hard to kind of envision that. But when you brought up like a family system, that might be easier for sometimes to kind of understand how a family system is systemic. Could you talk a little bit about that, in that parallel of kind of setting up for how our kind of our human family in this space, and the way that we do things can be systemic in that?
Yeah, like in a family, and even in a person, we have different parts of ourselves that kind of make a system too. So in a family, often people will play different roles in a family. You'll notice, and they're not like every family has the same roles, but you just kind of look at the family and notice what's happening. Maybe one kid is the kid that acts out a lot, another kid is the good kid that always does the right thing. And then one kid's kind of checked out and in the room all the time. And then you have the one maybe aggressive parent, or a passive parent, or you have high conflict parents, or, and that family system runs that way. The family function is in this way. And as everyone knows, as kids grow and change, sometimes the family has a hard time adjusting to the child's change. Or if one person in the family starts to go to therapy, or quits drinking, then the family system wants to kind of maintain itself. Which is the same in society too. The society has a structure, it wants to maintain that structure. It's not conscious. It's just the way that systems work. They kind of are used to working this way, and they want to kind of continue. So if you make a change, sometimes everyone in the family is going to bristle and say, no, you're the lazy one. You're like, but look, I'm getting good grades. Yeah, you're just lucky. People are trying to keep you where you were. Or as you grow and change as an adolescent, parents are remembering you as being a little child, and still treating you in that way. And so it's hard for the family to adjust to the changes. And so in family therapy, that's part of the work of family therapy, is understanding how systems can do that. It's called homeostasis of systems. And systems happen inside us too. Like we have ways that we work, that we're used to working. And maybe the ways that we're used to working function for us in the past, because that's how we survived our family. You know, we were quiet. We didn't speak up because when we did, we were harmed. But then later in life, we don't speak up and we continue to be harmed.
Yeah.
Even though we're bigger and we have more choices and,
Yeah.
you know, we're not, you know, 7 years old, but we have this internalized kind of system that continues. I think that happens in cultures. I think that happens in, you know, school systems and family systems, internal systems. And, yeah, it's like, how do you fix that? Or how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
You know, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
And one way, like right now, I'm doing something that's uncomfortable and coming and we're talking about race on TV or whatever.
Yes.
And my gut instinct is like, that's scary. And I'm fearful of judgment, or I'm worried about defining trauma wrong, which is very complicated. Or just like being vulnerable. And by doing it, you know, I'm hopefully shifting that within myself and creating space for that change to happen for other people too, maybe.
Yeah. I was so struck by homeostasis.
Yeah.
And how often we can be afraid of change, even when that change is really good.
Yeah.
It can still be so hard, and it's still going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of tell ourselves what's true.
Yeah.
Because if we let our comfort lead, it's not going to lead us to good change. It's going to lead us to homeostasis, to that sameness that might be unhealthy and hurtful to ourselves and to others.
Yeah. And so I think sometimes we know that.
Yeah.
And we're like, if only I could change, or if only I was brave enough to take this step, or I feel like this doesn't feel right, but I don't know what to do about it, or fearful of taking risks or speaking up, or fearful of abandonment too, like in families, because we have these close attachments and we're fearful of, you know, not being accepted. And yeah, thinking about race in that way, or just racism really, or just the structures of that, or other systems that are unhealthy too.
Yeah.
You know, other ways that we're doing things that don't feel good for us.
There's something nice about naming the in the past few years, systemic racism has been a term that has kind of gotten a lot more airtime, I guess. And it also has been a term that can trigger a lot of, you know, whether it's fear of, what do you mean? What are you saying? Where are you going with that? What kind of change are you talking about? Where, you know, like there's just, or maybe it's a yes, we're so ready. This is like, there's just a lot of different reactions that can come to that. But it's been in such an interesting process to remember that we do this in every area of life. And we do this in all of these different areas of life.
Yeah.
And we do it in all of these different levels. And this is just another one of them.
Yeah.
And it helps kind of integrate it, I think, into the normalcy of this is just a part of life. And I think for a while it's felt like it's like a separate kind of thing. And it's, this is a part of it.
Yeah, everything's in systems. I mean,
yeah,
you know, ecology.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
I mean, we all work together, and we impact each other.
Yeah.
But we're not always aware.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And in terms of like in a family therapy setting with a family system, or even an internal family system, which is like there are different parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Some of the ways to work with that is really being true to what do we authentically feel, and having compassion and understanding for what that is.
Yeah.
And allowing that to be okay.
Yes.
And understanding that just because, you know, this child, whatever, wants to get a GED and drop out of school doesn't mean that they're not okay and that we're still going to be okay. And whatever it is, or just because this part of us, you know, feels scared that that's okay. And we're going to notice the fear and allow it to be and witness.
Yeah.
And it's like in talking about race, that's also a thing that is like, what is your truth? What's coming up for you? Like allowing space and compassion, and creating spaces where people can feel heard and understood.
Bear witness to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like building understanding.
Yeah. And that empathy, that willingness to listen and really hear someone. Yeah. It's so powerful. I think we forget how powerful that is, that safe space where you can share.
And that's complicated when it comes to talking about race, because how is that safety, you know, how to create that safety? Is that a thing that's, you know, how possible is that? And that's been something that has been a challenge for me. In terms of how to have these conversations, or how to listen deeply without reacting. Also, you know, I don't know, like I guess it's just a question in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know how to even answer it.
Yeah.
But I mean, one way that I've done what I've tried to do is like try to read things that people or people who've published things, or listen to people that I know, or try to learn about history. Try to create spaces where I can try to build relationship or understanding. Yeah.
No, I really hear that. One of the things that really struck me in our conversation earlier was this: how do you have conversations about race without re-traumatizing? And that's a piece that. So some things that I encounter as I'm out and about is, there's two different things on my mind. One of them is that when I share a story that's been shared with me, and I've been given permission to share that story of a person of color in our community and what their experience was, it's not terribly uncommon for if it's a hurtful kind of experience for a neighbor that's white, that doesn't have that as part of their personal experience, to have some kind of reaction of like, no, really? Like, that doesn't really happen, does it? Or, you know, those kinds of like disbelief being the first thing that they're experiencing. And I'm thankful that we can have a bridge space, because I can give space for that disbelief, for there to be a process of, is this really who we are? Is this really today? Are these things really happening? And for them to kind of get to be in that part of the process. But I'm always aware of if they were having that, if they're in that part of their process with the person that's actively experiencing that hurt, that's a really hard thing to be met with, to share vulnerably about something that's going on, and for someone to say, no, that's not happening. That's not real, is it? And so there's that piece of like, oh gosh, I'm thankful we have these bridge spaces, but how do we continue along this process so that maybe someday when they are in a space where they can hear, that they can just hear, and that they can just hear that person's experience without their own kind of pushback almost.
Yeah.
And then there's that element of being out and about in the community and hearing how there's a real craving to hear people's stories, to hear the stories of people of color, and well, what are they experiencing today, and what is it? I want to know. I want to know that it's real today, and that awareness. So as I've been in this process, I've grown in my awareness of we're not quite yet a safe space for people to share those vulnerable stories.
No.
But then there's my community of neighbors who not just out of a prove it to me kind of sense, but also out of a but what does it mean today? What does today look like? So they're wanting to kind of understand what today looks like. But it's not time yet. Like it's just been a really interesting, I can see how easy it would be not easy, how very real it is that to share about your personal experiences of race and racism in your hometown can be a very vulnerable process. It's vulnerable for us.
Yeah, and I'm not even...
And we don't have personal experiences of... And so it's that's been a hard one for me to kind of understand myself and communicate to other people, and how do we support that process? But talk a bit on how do you see that process playing out in regards, like through that trauma lens?
Through the trauma lens, I mean, talking about race can be like traumatic for people because there's like racial trauma, and it'd be like me asking any person about like harm and pain that they've suffered with somebody that might not understand them, like someone who's suffered abuse, speaking that to someone that might not, be supportive or understanding.
Yeah. Or don't have any experience with that particular kind of abuse. And so they might not, they just might have that gap of.
Yeah. Or they might take it personally. I mean, yeah. So, one thing that we talked about before, this talk, there's this film, Last Chance for Eden, that was filmed. It's a therapeutic tool for talking about race, and it was like a group therapy type structure that was filmed in a series of films of a group of people of different racial, ethnic backgrounds, genders, and sexual orientations in a small group facilitated, and watching their conversations and then kind of noticing what comes up for each individual, if there are questions that arise, learning from people's experiences who were, very brave to do this thing and have it filmed and have it being used as a teaching tool, like people that really wanted to are, courageous enough to do that, and having that be a tool. And it's something that I wanted to use that tool here in the area, Grants Pass, Williams area, which I haven't done yet, but I want to.
Yeah. And we want you to.
Yeah. So that's one way. And there's other things that I've learned about, like there's psychodramas or theater of the oppressed or playback theater, which is also another forum where people's life experiences are played on stage by actors. So it's like, for example, I tell my experience of what I've experienced as, being who I am in this culture, in this situation. And then they play it out on stage and people get to witness it. And people get to, sometimes there's discussions afterwards or like ways for people to reflect on the experience to kind of help build bridges between people that have really different experiences. So like those are different forums I've looked at or thought about or explored. And also, maybe discussion groups around books with education and having people just talk to each other with other folks they feel comfortable and safe with.
Yeah.
As another way to kind of explore and learn. So there's some of the things that I thought about.
Yeah. One of the things a word that's been on my mind a lot lately is proximity. So just that kind of coming close, and sometimes you do that in the form of a book. and find a book by someone that doesn't have your experience, or on this topic, find a book that's written by a Black American that's talking about their experience of racism, and that how that's one way that we can help begin to bridge that gap between those differences in experiences.
Yeah.
So that we can kind of ready ourselves to make space. It's an interesting thing how there's this process of making space within ourselves, not just for the other, but also for our own experiences and what we bring to the table. You know, I have some people that I know, a friend in particular that I think, and this is legit because this is what trauma is, I think feels traumatized in how they were treated as a white man in regards to these conversations on racism. And so there's some sitting with and compassion for those experiences, being present to those, that creates space so that he can sit with somebody else, and that there's that slow process of, and then creating space in our community for people that are different. It starts, I feel like, in this individual space and keeps growing out from there.
Yeah. I mean, people often have a lot of defensiveness or disbelief or strong reactions in general to talking about race. And some anxiety around those things arising in a group of people that are, you know, different, you know, racial, ethnic backgrounds, and like how that's going to impact other people in the group for that person to have a really strong reaction. And if we don't, and if we aren't in groups that are not, you know, if we're in groups that have, you know, Black, white, brown people together, those things are going to arise.
Yeah.
They just do.
Yeah.
In my experience,
Yeah.
like being a therapist and taking trainings, or, you know, being in group discussions, even about things that aren't racial. Race is there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's
you know,
going to come up.
Yeah.
This is a part of life.
Right.
Yeah.
And how to create like in spaces for those things to be addressed if they do arise. Like if harms do come up, if people do feel uncomfortable or whatever, you know, how to navigate that. I'm very interested in that too. Like trying to build in supports so that people don't feel like they have to, like for example, a person of color in a training that feels like someone's, you know, done something harmful to them or said something that's offensive, or like has an ear of someone in the training, like they have a place to go. Or I've just thought about a lot of these things.
Yes. Yes.
And how to not just center the white person's reaction, which happens too.
Yeah.
So those are things I think about. And
one of the things I find myself wrestling through is I do believe that hierarchy is easier for us. And if we're talking about racial hierarchy, like it's easy to just focus on one. It's very hard for us to have space for all of us at the table.
Say more what you mean by racial, like hierarchy. I'm curious.
Yeah. So racial hierarchy is one of the ways that I have been kind of shifting how to think about racism, because that is what's happening. And sometimes when we use a word all the time, we can kind of forget that, like, oh yes, we're talking about racial hierarchy. And I think it can happen where we just shift the players in the game, as opposed to shifting the conversation that into we're not talking about hierarchy anymore. So one of the things that my ears heard, I know that you weren't saying this, but I'm noticing what I'm hearing, and here we are in process together.
Yeah, I'm here.
Is when there is a systemic, a continual thing there, it's so important. It can be so easy for that white person's story to be centered and for it to be focused on that. And which is why it's so important to really give attention to, because we're changing the system, right? We're trying to change, doing something differently. What I feel like sometimes we do, and sometimes the hurt that I hear from people with white bodies, the hurt that I hear is that they feel like there's just been there's going to be a switch. There's going to be a different racial hierarchy that's going to happen, as opposed to what I hope and crave for, which is, no, we all are here at the table. And yes, maybe there are some spaces where that is something that's desired. Yeah, we can switch. Someone might be saying, no, let's keep racial hierarchy in place, but displace you from that hierarchy, white people from that hierarchy space. That might be what some people are saying, but I don't think that's the majority conversation. And it's certainly not the conversation that I want to get to be in. I want to get to be in that conversation of how do we do this without that hierarchy, and how do we name in those situations where you're being displaced, racial hierarchy is not actually still happening, but there is going to be a shifting of the place you've been in because it's been a hierarchical system. I don't know if that's making sense. But
Yeah, that reminds me of like the idea, like feminist idea of like power with instead of power over, like the idea that we have power with each other. It works in also couples relationships. Where it's like if you believe that the only way that you're safe is if you're right and you're right and they're wrong. Then you don't connect compassionately, or like it's very hard to love when you're in a defensive posture. So coming to the table with like, however you feel is okay. Even if I don't agree with you, it's okay, because that you bring your own history and experience to the table. And based on your life experiences and who you are, that's your truth and my truth is mine, and we can hold space for each other's, and it's okay. And that no one's displaced really. And that
it's not real displaced.
Having power over is actually, in my opinion, a situation where you're having to maintain that power. And to maintain that power is, people have a lot of fear.
It's destructive.
Because you have to be afraid that someone's trying to take it from you.
It's that power over is hurtful to everybody involved. And that power with is this mutuality that empowers everybody involved, and there's space for everybody at that table.
Because if you need to have power over and you're afraid someone's trying to take it from you, you're in a position of weakness, because knowing that you have power, no matter that you're just a powerful person as you are, do you know what I'm saying? Or just that your truth is yours, and that's okay. I feel like the defensive comes from insecurity usually, not just around race, but in other areas too.
It's an interesting thing that I think you're right about, that the defensiveness comes from insecurity. And I'm struck by how so often to find that place where you can be secure enough to listen and give space, that you have to start with being listened to. And I do think it's a very true experience that it can be for those that are very ready, me included. I have had this personal experience that I'm very ready to want to talk about, but how can my neighbor be given space that I can not give space to? How can my neighbor of color be given space? I cannot give my white neighbor space to say, but all of their insecurities, and if I don't have compassion there and in that space for them, like they can't move forward. That insecurity will remain. Like if I can be that grounded, rested space and having compassion for whatever those insecurities are, whatever their concerns are, and say it's going to be okay. It's okay that they won't have that opening up that I'm wanting to get to see happen.
Yeah.
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 There's a, I'm going to totally kind of cheat here.
It's okay.
What's the podcast called, Trevor, that we listen to? Hidden Brain. Okay. So Hidden Brain podcast, some wonderful stuff that they're doing right now. And one of the things that they talked about that's just been really resonating with me is, they talk about how, now we often in the Grants Pass Remembrance, we often talk about saving space at the table. So this table that we're all seeking to come to be together at, like, if you're not at the table, we'll save you a space. Like we will talk about you respectfully, whether or not you are here yet. And there's always space for you here because we want this to be together, that we're doing this work, that there's room for all of us. We need all of us in this work. One of the things they were talking about is how the why we get to that table is going to be so different for all of us. But what's important isn't the reasons why or the values that get us there or the, it's the behavior. It's that action of we are at the table together. And, it's interesting how I feel like we can have a lot of rights and wrongs about the why you're at the table or the reasons. But it's going to look really varied, and creating that kind of space in us that we kind of keep, I feel like the space creating has come up a couple different times. It's just so important to being curious and listening long enough to hear, oh, you have this value. Did you know that actually ties into this piece here? Even though that's going to be a different why than your neighbor is here, we're all at the table, and that's what matters. Yeah. Anyway, that just really had struck me. There was another piece that I found myself thinking about before I do that. Was there anything else that was on your mind from that right now?
No, I mean, lots of things, but
Right.
you can ask me a question because I'm just like,
yeah,
that's okay.
I totally hear you. I'm trying to decide if I want to rewind to trauma,
Sure.
and how when we do think about racism and the experiences of people of color in our community and in our country, but it's so much easier to just talk about our community.
Yeah.
It can be really easy for us to forget that is a trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's intergenerational trauma too, which is a thing that happens in families too. Like if I speak of families, maybe people can understand that more.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a helpful
and
parallel for all of us.
I know more about that.
Yeah.
That's my marriage and family therapist. Yeah, that trauma is passed down in families, and we can see that, in research and things. And epigenetics is a real thing, meaning that.
Yeah, say that.
Epigenetics means that if you have a traumatic event that happens in your life, it can change your DNA.
Yeah.
So when you have a child, that child has the impact of that trauma in their DNA. And so it passes on in that way. And there's been research around this, that this is true. So sometimes someone will have, depression or anxiety or panic and things and not understand why, because they've not had a traumatic experience that they can think of. But their grandparents did, because grandparents were in a war, or parents, or you know what I mean? So that's also part of it. And also there's continuous trauma happening with racial trauma. So like every time someone walks in a store and people are looking at them and they're the center, people are feeling mistrustful, or every time a person, is pulled over by police much times more than like their white neighbor is, or, there's just more. So those things are happening too. So there's like the history, that's the impact on people's bodies and like family structure too. I don't know what we're talking about. Oh, trauma, how trauma impacts race. Yeah. And so it's like, if you had a trauma, whatever your trauma is, and I'm like, okay, we're going to come in a group of people. If you were a trauma where you were abused by a man, and then we're like, I'm going to bring you to a group of men and I want you to talk about
Oh my gosh.
this trauma that you had with this male person. Can they hold and these men are going to hold space for you, and they're going to listen deeply. Like maybe you're at a place where you feel safe enough to do that, but maybe you're not.
Yeah.
And maybe those men are not going to hold the best space for you because they might feel defensive and say, it's not all men and I'm safe, I promise. But are you sure that's really what happened? Like, what were you wearing? You know what I mean? So you might get these responses and not feel safe and heard. And I think it's similar to that. I mean, I'm speaking out of my own like guessing, you know what I mean?
No,
and also some of it is also experience, because I've had not personal experience, but just hearing people tell me.
Yeah. And at the point that you're at with your expertise and your education and your experience, your guessing is different than my guessing on some of this. So,
I'm just, because I've done some trainings on how to facilitate conversations about race, and had small group discussions with people in those trainings who've told me, gosh, I'm having such strong reactions, and I feel panicked, and I'm like, well, this is a traumatic thing we're talking about in a group of people that are not always knowing how to hold it very well. And so I think just bringing up the topic is just like, let's talk about some other form of violence and see how people respond to that.
I think it's a good thing to break down for people. We can get used to some of these terms and our own experience, and forget that someone else's experience is going to be totally different.
Also, my mind also went to like, there's more to that too. Like, as humans, when we're doing real well, it's hard for us to understand sometimes really get someone else's experience when they're not doing well. So that's just in general. Like, when we're, under a lot of stress, having feeling a lot of anxiety or panic, we understand it in the moment. But then, like, when our partner is, or our neighbors, or someone else is, often we're like, yeah, you'll be fine. Get over, maybe you just need to go on a walk, and you do really need to be acting this way right now. So we have a hard time. There's been research on this too, that we have a hard time really putting our feet in the shoes of another person when they're not.
That was my experience yesterday with my daughter.
Right. And
totally.
So, and there's more to that too. When something really bad happens to someone, this is like social psychology stuff. When something really bad happens to someone, for us to feel like I'm safe and that bad thing won't happen to me, we have to figure out what they did wrong to make it happen to them too. Yeah. So there's like, oh, well, maybe they got in an accident because they were on their phone, or they were maybe they, this happened to them because of some failure that they have. So I think there's some things that we do as humans that also make talking about race challenging. Because it's hard for us, even when we're not in a situation, to understand and to try to blame the person that was harmed. And we're also taught, good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people when we're children. And so we, for good or bad, if bad things happen to us, sometimes we think it's because we're bad. So some of these things that are social structures are just also impact that way that we talk about race or racism too.
Yeah.
It's like more complicated.
It is. I'm in a season recently with my husband where we're aware of like we're in an area where we're triggering each other, and all of our heightened things are all triggering. And it makes me think about like, gosh, it's a very real thing that conversations on racism in our country at this point in time, like it's triggering on many levels for all of us. And it's complex, and it's just so dynamic, and that's a very real thing. So in the midst of normalizing that, like, yes, this is true, and we can talk about it, and we can, that's so much. And part of the reason why I brought up the parallel with my husband is because I also had this sense of, wow, if we can walk through this and be present to this, like how much richer and deeper will our relationship become? And that's why I brought up that parallel, because that's here too. If we can be present to these conversations and listen in and attend and create space in ourselves to be able to do that, and create space to sit with our neighbors to be able to do that, and create space in our communities to be able to do that, how much richer and deeper will life become? Like, there's just so much good potential of that. I'm thinking again of the power over versus power with. That power with, where that mutuality that's just enriched so many ways. Yeah. Are there any other things that come up to your mind from?
I guess just that idea of like holding compassion, which like comes from not a place of like in trauma, like fight or flight, right, or freeze, but comes from a place of like feeling regulated, calm, figuring out a way to like create your own internal safety and groundedness, and know that that can help. Like, that's what in trauma therapy, that's what you do with someone, is help them access their own supports, internal, external, so that they can feel like they're safe enough to explore what's painful. And I really like My Grandmother's Hands. I don't know if you've heard of that book.
Yes.
It has a lot of cool exercises in it around exploring conversations about race, like how to, be in your body and notice what's arising, and tools to help you calm your nervous system if you feel activated or just overwhelmed. Just like self-compassion and understanding. If people don't have compassion for themselves, it's hard for them to really have compassion for other people. Yeah, I don't know. That was just another thing that popped in my head.
I think those are so. A while ago, it occurred to me that we're talking about trauma, and you're a trauma therapist, and so how do you heal from trauma is also the parallels of how we do this work, and how can we move forward? How do we heal from trauma? And those are all pieces that it sounds like they come into play. Are there any other pieces that come into play in regards to healing from trauma?
I mean, incorporating the body is really important. And creating those missing experiences, or just having those missing experiences. So for a person that has experienced, racial trauma, having the experience of feeling safe, feeling safer, knowing that they're okay and that there's nothing wrong with them as a person, and that they're, whatever these experiences, or for a white person, like understanding they're safe and okay, because there's fear going on around whatever these stories. I don't know. I don't know how to do that in a larger way. I've thought about that. That's why I've thought about that group therapy thing, different ways to have those missing experiences. And also just like building relationships with people. But I don't know. I'm talking a minute.
No, this is good. I just wanted to mention some.
I'm not an expert. I just want to say that too.
Just so you know, all of this resonates with so many other conversations that I've been in. It just is like this other angle of looking at it, and so it's just really fun to see the layers in which it really fits together. There was something that you said just a moment ago that I was gonna. Now I don't know what it was, because that's just part of the process, okay. Right? But it's. I think these things are really meaningful, and I think they do happen on multiple different layers and in different spaces. It starts with I think there's so many ways in which just with ourselves, becoming aware of what is going on in us and how do we give space for that, and how do we then create space to get to be with others. I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I personally just want to learn about other people's experiences.
Yeah.
And the impact of, me personally on other people. And make space for that. Like as a therapist, like also I want to do that too. As a family member, as a neighbor, as a, community member, and also in general, in a larger way. Because if I understand someone more or and I give that space, I have more wisdom to make decisions that are like in alignment with my values of like compassion, respect, care,
That's actually something so I had the opportunity of being a part of a group that got together this last week of people that were a part of the Grants Pass Remembrance work, and just kind of like a moment to be together, because so often we're doing our little thing and all the different parts of our community that we're in, and we don't have a chance to all kind of gather. There's a few of us that gather regularly. And we went around the group and shared, I think it was like how we got connected and why we connected in. And there were a couple of people that used the word intention, and that intentionality of, and I was so struck by how you said that this opportunity to have your values align with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And how that is an ongoing process that we're in of, we have things we believe, and we have so many experiences of, wow, I'm acting in this way that doesn't match with how I believe.
Yeah.
How can I grow in that and increase in my intention around acting in the way that I want to act and being the way that I want to be in these spaces. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful growth process to engage in. And I feel like this work really challenges me to continue to grow in that way, to continue to grow in curiosity and to continue to grow in creating that space and leaning in. Yeah. Anything else you want to share before we close off?
I just appreciate that you're doing this and that you're making the space to talk about these things and kind of normalizing or, creating a space to talk about things that are like, or race in general, but just topics that are often taboo or, avoided in culture and American culture. And yeah, just the bravery of putting yourself out there. I appreciate that. And creating opportunities to plug in and do work that's meaningful. Yeah. And I think I have questions for myself, like living here, and the history of this place and how to shift that. So that this place feels more inclusive and safer for people that are not white people.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's keep asking those questions and digging in. Yeah. And I gotta say there have definitely been like freak out moments. Those are the moments where I'm like, oh, it must have been bravery if I just kept doing the behavior, even though I kind of freaked out about it. But it's been such a rich process. It's been such a, like, I feel that it's that mutuality thing. I feel like I've been given to in so many ways that I'm just so thankful. So for those of us that are still, and that's a reminder for me, because as I will, that those freakouts don't end. They just look different. So wherever our freakouts are about those spaces of this is uncomfortable or this is hard, this is that kind of good change that brings up that it's almost like that the soil being tilled, like it's just brings that richness and life to ourselves and to our relationships and to our community. That so thank you so much for being brave in this space with me. It's been a joy.
I have like fear. I'm like talking about, not centering white voices, and we're two white people talking about race. But it's like, I don't know how else to do it living here, really.
Yeah.
So.
And I think there's like, that's been a lot of my fear too, of two white people talking about, or one white woman talking about racism. And one of the things that's been really important for me is to remember that it is with. So even though I'm not right here with somebody else that is a person of color that can be speaking from that personal experience and know that that's what we need at the table too, I'm still at the table too. And I will seek to be my part of the with part as much as I can, even though that can be, hard and scary and a fear of judgment. Totally. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Yeah.